Throughout history, experts and historians have faced the daunting task of unraveling strange events that seem to defy any logic. These include the discovery of out-of-place artifacts, unsolved true crime cases, or even sightings of unidentified creatures that left witnesses terrified. While explanations for these occurrences are usually found, some mysteries remain unsolved and continue to baffle even the most seasoned of experts. Many years later. Number 10. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was not only a German poet, but also a novelist, scientist, playwright, theater critic, and statesman. He'd been hailed as one of the greatest writers to have ever lived, but he's also the subject of a strange mystery that has never been explained. He was born in Frankfurt in 1749, and he grew up in a wealthy family. He likely got his love for literature from his father, who, after inheriting a fortune, collected rare and old books and paintings. His 7 children were educated using these books, though only Johann and his sister, Cornelia, lived past their childhoods. He had a close bond with Cornelia, but the opposite was true of one of his younger brothers, who lost his life while he was still young. It might be because of this that he developed a serious dislike of works that portrayed someone passing away. He was expected by his family to study law as an adult and to marry as soon as possible, and he followed this path, but at a leisurely pace. He started his studies in Leipzig in 1765, and after relocating to Rome, he became a pupil of Johann Winckelmann, a famous art historian. He started writing plays and novels, but these were eventually burned when he realized that they were inferior to the works that he was studying. He based one of his plays on a woman with whom he'd fallen in love, and since she rebuted his advances, it portrayed a woman who starts regretting getting married to the wrong man about a year into the marriage. He decided to go back to Frankfurt after he fell seriously ill, possibly with tuberculosis, and once there his condition worsened to the point where he almost lost his life, but he eventually recovered. It's believed that this caused him to convert to evangelical Christianity, but he retained his interest in alchemy and started formulating the ideas that would later result in his most famous play, Faust, which centers around a man who sells his soul to the devil. He would go on to write many more great works that inspired thousands of writers that came after him, but he also had an unsettling encounter one day that left him shaken and confused, as he was unable to explain it. He'd met a woman named Frederica, and after ending their relationship, was heading home one day. He was riding his horse along a footpath in the early 1770s, and thanks to the events of that evening was feeling depressed. But he then noticed another rider coming from the opposite direction, and as soon as he saw him, he felt unsettled. Something about the man seemed familiar, but also strangely ominous. It was only when he got closer that he realized why. He would later state that he not only saw the man in front of him, but he also saw him in his mind's eye, and when he got a good look at the stranger, he realized it was in fact him. He was dressed in clothes that he'd never seen before, and as he passed his doppelganger, he felt a strange calm come over him before the second man simply disappeared before his eyes. He would later state that he forgot about the incident almost immediately, but 8 years later, the memory would come flooding back when he was riding along that same road. And this time, he was traveling in the opposite direction, and as he reached the same spot, he realized that he was dressed in the same clothing that his doppelganger was wearing that night. These events have never been explained, and many other people who have seen their doppelgangers have been left just as baffled as Goethe was. Number 9. Salt Lake City in Utah has become the site of a very strange mystery that the authorities are struggling to solve, and to date, no explanation has been found. In 2023, it was reported that public land officials were discovering something strange in the area, and that they were looking for the person or people responsible. Around the foothills in the area, they started finding some strange antenna arrays that are made up of solar panels, battery boxes, and of course, antennas. These devices have been found bolted onto several summits and peaks in Salt Lake City, but no one knows why or who's responsible. To date, more than a dozen of these devices have been located, one of which was found at an altitude of 7,000 feet on the summit of Mount Wyre. A few of these setups were found on ridges in the area, and at first they were a minor annoyance until several more were erected and had to be dismantled. The first of the antennae was spotted by city workers who didn't pay them much mind, and at first they were left where they were. It seemed like a waste of time and money to remove them, and they didn't seem to pose any type of threat. But when several more were discovered on land owned by the Forest Service and University of Utah, action had to be taken. It's illegal to erect such a structure without the required permits, and since the person responsible has not reported these antennae to anyone, it's assumed that they were built illegally. Unfortunately, the owner of the devices cannot be traced, since the antennae don't have any identifying marks. They were installed so thoroughly that specialized tools had to be brought in to remove the bolts that were used, and an investigation is ongoing in hopes of identifying the culprit. After the first two of these devices was removed, the area experienced a lot of snowfall, which made it hard to locate others and even harder to dismantle them. With no further clues to follow, Salt Lake City Public Lands has asked anyone with information on the devices to come forward so that the people responsible can be identified. Number 8. On the 2nd of March, 1996, a mystery started that has left investigators baffled ever since. At around 7:30 that morning, 21-year-old Alicia Reynolds left her house in Baltimore, Maryland after saying goodbye to her husband. She then got into her car and started driving to Charlottesville in West Virginia, where she was supposed to meet up with her mother, with whom she was going to spend the day doing some shopping. They were supposed to meet up at a mall at 10:30, but Alicia never showed up, and later that evening, her car was found abandoned 50 miles away along Route 29. The vehicle had no damage, and investigators could find no reason for its abandonment. Several witnesses stated that they saw her talking to a clean-cut man who drove a dark-colored pickup truck, but then the mystery only deepened. More than 20 women contacted the police to report that they'd been approached by a man driving such a pickup truck. He would either start driving next to or behind him while flashing his truck's lights, and when they pulled over, he would claim to have spotted a problem with their vehicles. Two of these women took him up on his offer of driving them to a payphone, after which the man simply left. They described him as helpful and polite, but those who refused to pull over or declined his offer for a ride to a payphone stated he became visibly irritated and he could be seen punching his truck's steering wheel. It's believed that these incidents were practice runs and that the same man is responsible for Alicia's disappearance. One woman became frightened when, while in his truck, he pulled over several times, claiming to have difficulty seeing. When she decided to leave, a fight broke out, and the man pushed her out of the vehicle, causing her to break her ankle. But she considered herself lucky when the news broke that Alicia was found a week after that incident, and 2 months after she had disappeared. On the 7th of May, she was found deceased in the woods about 15 miles from Culpeper, and it was clear that she'd been attacked. It was suggested that the man may be carrying out these crimes in other areas, and that he may have attacked several other women. Alicia's family feels that she was a victim of serial killer Richard Mark Evans, who was known to be active in the area at the time. They suggest that two serial killers are rarely active in the same area at the same time, and since they found no other explanation, they believe he must have ended Alicia's life that day. More details have been released about the suspect thanks to witness accounts, and authorities have spoken to several men, but they've all been ruled out as suspects. One man, Darrell Rice, has been named a suspect since he attempted to kidnap a woman around the same time as Alicia's disappearance, but it remains unknown whether he was the Route 29 stalker. Number 7. In the 1870s, a man named Urban Napoleon Stanger had the very important job of a baker in London. At first, he catered mostly to a part of London, England, named Shoreditch, where German expatriates were living. He was married to Elizabeth Gallen, and the couple is said to have had a close-knit circle of friends in the area. He became an English citizen in 1977, after which he started running a bakery on Lever Street in Islington, a far poorer part of the city that was looked upon as dangerous by the wealthy. But despite the area being somewhat of a slum, he managed to make some money, and before long, he'd amassed a fair bit of savings. He was able to hire assistants, and he was often relieved by one of his friends, a baker named Franz Stamm. The years that followed were no different than 1877, as he continued running the bakery and made even more friends. But 4 years later, tragedy would strike. On the 12th of November, 1881, he was seen by an unnamed witness at around midnight, but he then simply vanished without explanation. When he could not be located, Franz and his wife Alice took over his bakery on Lever Street, and soon they removed Urban's name from the shop's sign, despite claiming to be just helping out. The bakery was renamed F.F. Stamm, and according to those who knew the couple, Franz seemed completely undisturbed by his friend's absence, and he made no effort to find out what had become of him. Elizabeth, Urban's wife, continued working at the bakery since she had no other income, and she never heard from him again. He was declared legally deceased a year later, and when his will was read out, it stipulated that Elizabeth would only receive her inheritance once she started living with another man. Just a few weeks later, she also went missing, but she resurfaced sometime later in a different part of London. A reward of $50, which was a lot of money back then, was offered for information leading to Urban's location, or the person responsible for his disappearance, but no leads were ever received. But it came to light that Stamm had gained access to Urban's savings, and that he had squandered all of his money. The bakery was slated to be closed down, as Stamm had to file for bankruptcy. He demanded that he be given $1,500 from Urban's estate, after claiming that he had a mortgage deed for the bakery, and after it was paid to him, he avoided losing the business. But it would soon come to light that he'd forged the mortgage deed. He and Elizabeth, Urban's wife, were charged with conspiracy and forgery. She served a year in prison with hard labor, while Stamm was sentenced to 10 years. The prevailing theory in Urban's disappearance is an unsettling one that has never been proven, but no other explanation has been found. Most people at the time believed that the Stamm couple and Elizabeth conspired to take over the business, and to do so, they had to get rid of Urban. Number 6. One would think that with a title like Countess of Desmond, Catherine Fitzgerald would be well known, but the truth is that many people have never heard of her, despite the seemingly remarkable life she lived. Catherine was born in Castle of Dromana, Ireland, in either 1500 or 1504, and her second husband was the 12th Earl of Desmond, Thomas Fitzgerald. During the latter years of her life, she lived in Inchiquin Castle, having been granted a lifetime tenancy by her husband. But it was stipulated that when she passed away one day, the castle would revert to the Earls of Desmond. But she had other plans. In 1575, she handed the deed to the castle and all of its land to the incumbent Earl, Gerald Fitzgerald, who in turn handed the castle over to his servants. But after Fitzgerald was found guilty of leading a rebellion in 1582, the castle was confiscated and given to Sir Walter Raleigh. He leased some of the surrounding land out to others, but ensured that Catherine could remain in the castle as previously arranged. Raleigh assumed that she wouldn't live much longer, and that he would then have the castle to himself. But when she lived much longer than he expected, he started making arrangements to have her evicted. By this time, her daughter was already close to 90 years old, but the pair traveled from Cork to London by ship, and on foot, which was a remarkable feat. Her daughter had fallen ill, but Catherine refused to give up, and she pulled her husband behind her on a cart, determined to oppose the conviction against her. From here, the legends surrounding the Countess became almost too fantastical to believe, keeping in mind that she was already over 100 years old. After returning to Ireland in 1604, she could be seen walking miles to the market every single day, unaided and under her own steam. Furthermore, it's said that her teeth grew back after falling out from old age, and that this may have happened as many as 3 times over. While some historians have disputed these claims, others believe them to be true, and if that is the case, she may have become the oldest person to ever live, as some accounts state that she lived to the age of 140. Whether she really did live as long as claimed may never be proven, and for now, all we have to go on are the ambiguous accounts of her life that leave many questions unanswered. Number 5. There have been many accounts of villages and towns that were plagued by vampires in the past. And while most of these accounts are taken with a grain of salt and chalked up to superstition, some of these stories seem to have a ring of truth to them. One such tale was told to the poet and painter Augustus Hare by a certain Captain Fisher, who was the owner of an old house in Cumbria, England, called Kroglin Grange. The Fisher family had lived in the house for hundreds of years, and the building had become well known in the area thanks to its strange characteristics. It only stood one story high, but it had a terrace from where the surrounding land could be seen, including a church that was situated some distance away. Eventually, the Fisher family became too large to live in the house, and they decided to rent it out before moving to the south. 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister called Edward, Michael, and Amelia Cranswell, took over tenancy of the house, and in a very short time span, they became well liked in the area. They were said to have looked after their neighbors who were much poorer than they were, and they soon gained a favorable reputation in the town. They felt that they were perfectly suited for the house, and their first winter in the building seemed to pass quickly. When summer broke, temperatures started to soar, and on one particular day, it was said to be almost unbearable. Edward and Michael decided it was too hot to do any work, and instead lay under the trees on the property reading their books. Amelia spent the day on the veranda, but she also was unable to get much done thanks to the prevailing heat. After they had their supper, they retired to the veranda and spent some time talking before they each went to bed in their respective rooms. But Amelia found it too hot to sleep and spent some time looking at the moon through her closed window. But then something truly strange happened. She noticed what seemed like 2 dim lights in the distance, and at first she thought she was seeing a light from the churchyard, but she then realized that she seemed to be traveling towards that house, and they were part of something larger that she could not yet make out. The lights grew bigger, and as they approached the house, she started to panic, and unable to figure out what they were, she jumped out of bed and ran to her door, which was positioned next to the window, and as the lights arrived, she tried to call for help but was unable to. Still fumbling with the key in the door's lock, she started hearing scratching sounds at the window, but that soon changed when the strange creature, which had a brown face and glowing eyes, started to pick at the lead that kept the window in place. It was clear that it was trying to get into the room, and it managed to remove one of the panes of glass from its frame before reaching through with what she described as a bony finger to undo the latch. It then launched into the room and seized her by her hair before biting her neck. She was then finally able to scream, and her brothers came running into the room. They managed to pry the door open with a fire poker, but as they ran into the room, the creature fled through the open window. Amelia eventually made a full recovery, but the 3 siblings were left shaken by the experience. The following spring, Amelia was once again awoken by the sounds of scratching at her window, and this time she screamed when she saw the same creature. Edward and Michael came running into the room with their firearms. They followed the creature across the property. They fired and hit it in the leg, and they saw it disappear into a crypt in the churchyard. The next day, the brothers and a few men from the area opened the crypt, and inside they found a coffin containing the very same creature. They removed it from the crypt and burned the mummified remains, after which it was never seen again. Today, the creature is still referred to as the Kroglin vampire, and the tale is still retold on dark and eerie nights. Number 4. Netta Fornario, known to her friends as Netta, was born in Egypt in 1897, and from a young age, she showed an interest in the spiritual world, especially occultism. She joined the occult order called the Alpha et Omega, and believed herself to be a psychic with some very unique abilities, such as healing people through telepathy. After moving to the Isle of Iona in Scotland in 1929, she was warned by those close to her that she was treading on a very dangerous path, but she ignored these warnings since she didn't show a mere interest in these matters, but considered them to be a way of life. She stayed in a cottage which was a short distance away from the island's village, and the owner of the cottage, a woman known only as Mrs. Cameron, immediately welcomed her with open arms. She believed Netta was ill due to her strange habits and odd behavior, but she preferred not to pry, didn't ask any questions. She noticed that Netta was always very pale and that she could only walk short distances at a time, but Mrs. Cameron believed she would recover soon enough. In reality, Netta was intentionally starving herself in order to enter a trance-like state that allowed her to become one with the universe, or so she believed. She would later tell her host that she'd come to the island to contact the Green Ray Elementals, which are said to be fairies that look after nature and that help trees, flowers, and plants grow. Mrs. Cameron found this very strange, but she left Netta to her own devices. Then, on the 16th of November that year, Netta came running out of a room, and it was clear that she was very anxious about something. She told Miss Cameron that she needed to get off the island without delay, since something or someone was coming after her. She added that she had a vision of a rudderless ship that was sailing through the sky, but this meant nothing to Mrs. Cameron. She was unable to leave the island straight away, since there was no ferry to the mainland, and she started packing her belongings so that she'd be ready to leave at first light. In the meantime, she went back to her room, but emerged a few hours later, stating she no longer needed to leave, but she seemed to have aged at least 10 years during that time. She no longer had the carefree spirit that she had when she arrived on the island, and seemed certain that whatever or whoever was after her would eventually catch up to her. The next morning, her room was found empty, and when she could not be located, a search was started. For 3 days, locals from the island looked for her, and on the 19th of November, she was discovered deceased by Hector McLean and Hector McNiven, next to Scythian Moor, which is known as a fairy mound. Carved into the ground beneath her, they found a cross, and in her one hand she was clutching a sharp blade. Another blade was found a short distance away, and it was noted that the silver cross that she wore around her neck had turned black. She had cuts on the soles of her feet as if she'd been running on rough ground or rocks, and no injuries were found on her body. Her passing was never explained, but witnesses would later state that they had on several occasions seen Netta walking with a cloaked man who was never identified. The official cause of her passing was recorded as exposure to the elements, but many people believed that something more sinister was at play, and that Netta was a victim of something otherworldly. Number 3. The Yellowstone National Park has been the site of many unsolved disappearances over the years, one of which involves a 36-year-old man named Leroy Piper, who hailed from Ohio, and he was staying at the Fountain Hotel in 1900. The hotel itself, which burned down in 1916, had a reputation for being haunted, but despite this, it was the preferred location for wealthy visitors to the park. It was situated north of Fountain Paint Pot in the lower Geyser Basin and contained all the amenities a wealthy guest could possibly want. It even had a bear feeding station that was built at the back of the building, and on a few occasions guests were attacked, but the bears were allowed to remain. Rangers working in the park at the time were relieved when it burned down one day, as they'd grown weary of the ghost stories surrounding the building, and they felt that it was no longer needed since cars had been invented by that point, and very few people stayed overnight anymore. News reports from the time state that Leroy was the heir of a millionaire, and he was seen in the hotel wearing diamond rings and expensive clothing. On the night of the 20th of July, 1900, he bought a cigar in the lobby and walked out onto the porch, presumably to smoke it without bothering the other guests. He'd stated that he was on his way to California to settle his uncle, William Piper's estate, from which he was set to inherit $100,000. It was only the following morning that it became apparent that Leroy was missing, and a search was organized. It's said that great efforts were made to locate him due to his high status, but despite a search effort that lasted for more than a month, he was never found. Some believe that he had, thanks to a long illness, become delirious and wandered aimlessly into the wilderness, where he lost his life to wild animals. His wife was unwilling to accept that he had simply disappeared, and she hired a private detective who, despite a $1,000 reward, was unable to find any sign of Leroy. Her brother would later travel to the park to conduct another search, but he was also unsuccessful, and to this day, it remains a mystery as to what happened to Leroy and why he decided to leave the hotel in what's assumed to have been the dead of night. Number 2. The case of the disappearance of 25-year-old Chase Lackey is one that left investigators and his family baffled since he vanished in 2017, and his fate remains unknown. Chase was born in Crosby, Texas in 1991, but he eventually moved to Houston. There, he and his dog, Champ, lived in an apartment that was situated in East Sam Houston Parkway, and he was employed as an iron worker for a local construction company. He was a huge baseball fan and was a member of a social team that played a game on the 30th of June 2017. His father, Craig, attended the game, which was a doubleheader. His team won the first game, but Craig was unable to play for the second since he had to get some sleep before his shift the next morning. He and Chase shared a hug before he left, and Craig has since stated that he will never forget that hug, since it was the last time that he saw his son. He was seen by an old friend on the 2nd of July while he was walking Champ along West Sam Houston Parkway, but the next day he failed to show up for his shift. When he couldn't be located, he was reported as missing by his family, and an investigation was launched. When his apartment was searched, all of his belongings were found inside. These included his driver's license, cell phone, wallet, passport, debit card, and social security card. No signs of foul play or forced entry were found, but it was believed that he intended to return to the apartment since his truck was still parked in the building's lot. Champ was also nowhere to be found, and it was speculated that something had happened to Chase while they were out on a walk. His mother, Debbie, would tell the police that he'd spoken about going on a trip to California, but added that he would never have left without informing his friends and family. Furthermore, he would likely have driven there in his truck, which was still at his apartment. The surrounding area was searched to no avail, and his family started putting up missing person flyers in hopes that someone would come forward with information, but the investigation soon stalled. They've since made multiple appeals to the public and created a Facebook page to bring awareness to Chase's case. They believe that someone in the area must have seen him or has information on what happened to him, but no one has come forward with any new leads. While the case is now 3 years old, the Harris County Sheriff's Office has stated they are still investigating the case. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Harris County Sheriff's Office at 713-221-6000. Number 1. In December of 1924, Nels and Annie Anderson were living in Billings, Montana, where they owned their own business, a barber shop that doubled as a beauty parlor. They were doing well financially and hired a housekeeper called Anna Erickson, who described them as friendly and reliable people. By that point, she'd been working for them for some time and had grown accustomed to their daily routine. She would later report that the couple had been working at the shop on the 6th of December that year, but that same night a mystery started that remains unsolved to this day. The Andersons would usually close up shop in the late afternoon, after which they would go straight home to spend time with their children. At the time, prohibition was in effect, and neither Nels nor Nellie was in the habit of visiting speakeasies like so many other people did. Their house was only a short distance from the shop, but it's known that they'd bought some groceries that afternoon and hence would be driving home. But that night, they never came home, and Anna contacted the police the next morning when there was still no sign of them. Corporal Charles Heagney and traffic officer William Laurel decided to investigate, and their first stop was at the shop where the couple's car was still parked in its regular spot. They managed to get a look at the inside of the shop through the window blinds and were immediately taken aback by what they saw. They spotted one of Nell's hands draped over a chair and immediately suspected that something was wrong. The shop's door was forced open, and it was immediately apparent that the couple was about to head home, since Annie was dressed in her coat and hat, but they were both deceased. Annie was found in an area at the back of the shop, while Nels was seated in one of the barber's chairs, wearing his coat and one glove. The other glove was found on the floor, and it was clear they'd been attacked. It was determined that Annie's life was ended before she was dragged to the rear of the shop, and biological material was found in several areas, including on the groceries that they had purchased. It seemed that this was a personal attack, since no cash had been stolen from the register, and both Nels and Annie had money on them that wasn't taken. The weapon used in the attack was an axe that contained no fingerprints, leading the police to conclude that the culprit had been wearing gloves to conceal their identity. Despite the best efforts of investigators, no suspects or motives were ever found. The couple seemingly had no enemies, and since they weren't robbed, it remains unknown who committed the act and why they chose to end their lives in such a horrific manner. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.